We've been talking about looking at scripture. We're going to be turning to the story and spending a lot of time with David and Bathsheba in 2 Samuel. So if you want to turn there, you get a head start on this. I wanted to start this out by saying that the concepts that I'm going to talk about, for instance, in Eastern cultures, not only is honor an important thing, but shame as well. And in Japanese culture, Chinese culture, they don't live necessarily as individuals like we would say this. They will depend a lot on their family, not only for what they do and how they do it, but for support. And the concept of who they are not just runs now with that individual, but it's who they are as part of that family. And beyond that, they even revere and honor ancestors, even more so than we do. And so when we're looking at an Eastern view of how people read the Bible, what I'm getting ready to tell you is not an either or. I'm not telling you that Western thought, how we view ourselves and how we read the Bible is wrong. I'm not going to tell you that what they do is right or wrong. What I am going to tell you is that God and the Holy Spirit can work in either venue. The reason I'm going over all this is to let you know that sometimes when we read a Bible story, we say to ourselves, well, this is what happened. This is how they were feeling. This is what, and we're basing it all on our belief system and our training and upbringing. So I want to put that out there for you. If I came home and Nora had donuts. Everybody knows I like donuts. Or Coke. I can't have Cokes anymore. That's a diabetes thing. Donuts are too. So I'm just out of luck all the way around. But if I came home and she said, because I love you so much, here are these donuts. And I said, I love donuts. Man, I love donuts. Thank you. And I love you too. Is she a donut? Do I have the same feelings for her that I do the donuts? Be careful how you answer that. I'm going to be in trouble.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. I love her, but in a different way than I love the donuts. Now, you all know this. In the Greek language, love has different forms. Do you know what they are? What are the types of?
Friends.
Okay.
Is one.
There's one.
Agape.
Agape.
Romantic love, but I can't remember.
Eros.
Eros.
Yes.
Eros. That's what it is. Eros.
But there are others. We know Eros. We know Philia. But I'll bet you've never heard of Luda or Ludus. No, Ludus. And that is a type of love that describes like the physical affection that children have for each other. Their children love each other, but it's not Eros. And it's not like brother, sister. It's a different level of love. Something akin for adults would be when you first start dating. Nora's grandfather talked to her And he let her know right away that she liked me, but she didn't love me. You know, that takes, well, we've been at it for 54 years, and I'm not sure we reached that plateau yet. But it takes time to reach that level of love. And there's another love that's called pragma. And it's, I'm just going to read this. The psychologist, Eric Fromm, said that we expend too much energy on falling in love and need to learn more how to stand in love. And that's kind of that upper level of love that I'm talking about. It's if she winds up being incapacitated and she's in a wheelchair or whatever, I don't walk out. I'm going to stand in that love. It's a steadfast love. It doesn't bend. What?
He said like she would. If you were made.
What they're saying is,
we don't think she really did.
Based on experiences in my life where I had a motorcycle wreck and she just let me lay there and said, "Stupid man, why won't you get up?" Well, you know. So
she loved you. She just didn't want to look at you.
Yeah, and the fact that she wouldn't marry me until she made sure I came home from the Southeast Asia with all my body parts. You know, said, "I'll marry you when you come home and I check you out."
Now y'all know how shallow I am.
Well, maybe it's I don't think it's shallow. It's pragmatic.
Surely there's another Greek word for that kind of love.
Agape.
There is one. It's called Philotia, Philautia, and it's self-love. So yes, there is.
Oh no.
Now, what that means really is it's a kind of a self-love where you have confidence in yourself, where you love yourself and you function. You're able to give compassion. You're able to give love because you're confident in yourself. You feel secure, and therefore you're more willing to share. Whereas somebody who's not sure about themselves might not be willing to expend that love, that energy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just wanted to put that out there. We talk about the church as community, but yet I think a lot of us, we like the word, we like the thought, but we don't live community as much as, say, an Eastern religion, or even I could say South American in some cases from my experience. In America, the formation of ourselves, how we build ourselves up, how we see ourselves, kind of comes from that pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of a thing. And we form ourselves based on the differences between right and wrong. And that's probably how you were raised if you think about it. That's not right. That's wrong. Don't do that. That's wrong. And so we say it's right or wrong. We get even our law system is based a lot on judging somebody whether they were right or whether it was wrong. Well, even to the point that we take a particular scripture, if you want to look at it, put your finger in the other one. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and it's verses 2 and 3. Anybody want to read it? Okay. Shy. I'll read it. You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone. You show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Now, we tend to take that and say, our recognition of whether we're doing something is something that's internal. It's written on our hearts. We read God's word, and it's written on our hearts and our minds. And that's where we make our decisions. But that's not necessarily so in other cultures. I'm going to have to write this down. Have you, any of you seen Lord of the Rings? Okay. Pretty sure I spelled that right. I didn't. Anybody know how to say that? Don't you watch Tigers?
Yes, but it could be Vegas.
It's pronounced Yegas. Real thing. It started with Plato, who was contemplating what makes people do what they do and whether or not they feel bad about it. In Plato's story, and it carried on throughout the centuries, there was a person who found a cave, and in the cave was a huge man who had a horse beside him. And on the man's hand was a ring. And this person took the ring, put it on his finger, and when he turned it one way, he became invisible. When he turned it back the other way, he became visible. And he used that power to help the king and became powerful himself, enough so that he ultimately defeated that king because he could be invisible, see and hear things that he didn't see or hear, that nobody knew he was there. And then he was able to defeat that king. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings doesn't ever really tell you that story about the ring. But as a writer, he knew it. As a researcher, he knew it. And that's why the ring has so much importance. Now, the question is, when we have that ring on, and I'm just going to read this. Plato said, "No man can be imagined to be of such an iron nature that he would stand fast in justice if he was free to act without anyone's knowledge. No man keeps his hands off of others' things if he could safely get away with it." Now, there's another movie made. Maybe you all remember it if you're movie fanatics, The Invisible Man. Most people have seen The Invisible Man. Same premise. What would you do if you were invisible? That you could walk into any room, go any place, see anything, and you have all that information, all the power. Even though you're invisible, you could hurt somebody and nobody would even know you were there. Now, what's the justice part of that? How do we analyze that? Plato said it. Is there anybody on this earth? I'll let you think about this. Could you be invisible and not do something wrong? If you knew you could sit on your boss's conversations and be one step ahead of you, or if you could spy on your wife or your husband, or if you could whatever, how many of you would say, Oh, I'd be perfect. I would never break any kind of moral anything. Plato didn't think that you could. And he seemed to think that most men could not withstand that temptation. I don't know if you knew this, but Emperor Nero loved to sing. But when he said singing, that referred to singing in public, in front of people. Not singing in the shower, not singing as you toddle down the hallway. It's singing referred to being in front of a lot of people. And it meant that you were vulnerable. How many of you would want to right now go into where all those college students are, walk up to the front and sing for them? Nobody? Neither would I. I started to lead singing one time for a girl who was going to get baptized, and she changed her mind.
About getting baptized or about letting you?
Both. I'm out. True story. Okay. Now, I think I'll let you guess. How many times do you think the word shame or shamed is used in the Bible? I'll give you a hint. It's more than 300. 431 times. It's a word that's used a lot. And I'm going to be referring to it a lot. You all know this. In John chapter 16, Jesus is telling his disciples about him leaving. And in verse 7, he says, "But very, very truly, I tell you, it is for your good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. When he comes, he will prove the world to be in the wrong about sin and righteousness and judgment. About sin, because people do not believe in me. About righteousness, because I am going to the Father, where you can see me no longer. And about judgment, because the prince of this world now stands condemned." Now, I said this before. The advocate, the paraclete, was sent for us. And we tend to think he will prick our conscience. Now, before we get into the David story, you know the story about him and Bathsheba. Anybody not familiar with it? I was going to say, if you've been in the Church of Christ longer than 10 years, why, you've heard it in half a dozen sermons or Bible classes. Can you tell me where in that story, we're going to go through it, but right now, can you tell me where it says that David's conscience was pricked? Remember we said we think heart and mind. We're going to look at it and see. So let's turn to 2 Samuel. Starts in about verse 11. But, what am I doing? 2 Samuel 11. Is it 2 Samuel 11? Yeah, 11 with David and Bathsheba. Yeah. Some of your books will have a heading on it, David and Bathsheba. So it is chapter 11. It starts off, and if you don't mind, I'll read these and just go into them. Let's start with at the beginning. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Why would they start that story talking about David not being with his army and staying in Jerusalem? Is it just a plot device to introduce Bathsheba? Because Bathsheba wouldn't have been out with the army.
Well, none of the other guys were there. It explains why her husband wasn't there. I've always heard, and it's probably a Western thing, but that other kings were off to war, but he didn't go. And so he wasn't really doing his king job.
He wasn't doing his kingly job. And that's a dishonorable thing for him to do, to let his men go out and get killed. And that's going to come back as we look through the story. Look at the next verse. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. Now, I guess in our debauchery-filled culture now, that might happen, but most women don't bathe in public. Now, this is at night. How would he see her unless she had lights on? What else are you doing?
It would be torches or something. It wouldn't be lights.
Well, I mean,
some illumination.
There was
well, it says evening. Maybe it wasn't quite dark yet. Well, that's what this says anyway. I don't know what yours says.
But he got up from his bed though.
He got up from his bed.
Well, there you go.
He couldn't sleep, and he got up, walked out on his palace thing. Now, think about this scene. And the English teacher and me just loved this. Picture this scene. The palace is right here. Now, when you go to the state capital or some other capitals, don't the rich and the powerful want to be close to the center of power? Who would have been on the outskirts of this city? It would have been the poor people. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but her husband, what does it say about him? Who is he? He's a Hittite. He's not a Jew. Now, if he's a mercenary who's working for this Jewish army, he must be making a lot of money, because he's got a house that's not only right next to the palace, but tall enough that David can look out and watch her bathing. So we see that he's in this situation. Now I'm going to ask you another question, and this is supposition. In the White House, for instance, you have the president's office, and then there are offices that go down the hallway. And those officers that surround the president are generally by rank. Now, if a secretary was working for one of the people and she went out into the hallway to make a phone call, and the president walked down the hallway, would that be an unusual thing? Or could she say, well, of course I might see the president. He's in this hallway all the time. Is it possible Bathsheba knew what she was doing with the king, with David? She knew, everybody knew. People talked at that time. People talk today. So it's possible that she knew that he would be around or out. Do you think people remember her husband was in the army? The army would have people coming back and forth all the time. She would know that David was not out with the army. So let's continue. And David sent someone to find out about her. Now, in one version, the NASB version, and I think a couple others, the servant replied with a question. Probably in the NIV and in the old King James, it may be a statement. But he says, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Now, why would the servant, he just said, go get Bathsheba. Why would he ask that question?
Wasn't Eliam one of David's mighty fighting men? I mean, it seems like I had read somewhere that Bathsheba was the daughter of one of his fighting men.
But why? But why would that guy ask the king?
Because she's married.
Yeah.
He wants to reaffirm to David. Are you sure?
Yeah. Do you know who this really is?
You know who this is?
Yeah.
She ought to be off limits.
Yeah, she ought to be off limits. And what does he say?
Send him when we get her.
She says, go get her. And David sent messengers to get her. Not just one, but other people who can talk. So all this is happening, and there's going to be a lot of people who know what's going on here, and this is going to spread. Why would, I mean, that servant is trying to save David's face. He's trying to give him an honorable way out. But then it says she came to him and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that. I hope you don't mind. But if you want to know where it can be found, what she was doing and why, it's in Leviticus chapter 15. Read Leviticus 15 and it'll explain to you what she was doing and why. But it had a lot to do with her fertility at the time. She was cleaning herself after this purification rite. Does that make sense? And so she was going to be more fertile at that point. This isn't a uh-oh, David's in trouble kind of a situation here now. He was king. What do you know about the kings in the old world? They could take anything they wanted. They could buy anything they wanted. They could pay for it all. It wasn't uncommon for them to not have more than one woman, right? So this isn't a thing where, uh-oh, he's in trouble, because it's okay for him to do this. The culture said it was okay for him to do this. Now, then she went back home. Some of the versions say he sent her back home. So depending on which translation you have, it could be that she was offended because, okay, I brought you, I'm done with you, out. But either way, she went back home. And the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Now, his affair wasn't a private thing. He's had servants. He's had all kinds of people that are aware of what's happening here. So it's not just something private that he's skulking around doing. The real conflict, she's not mentioned after this point, other than Uriah's wife, Mrs. Uriah. Now the story turns, and the problem is with David and Uriah. And so in verse 6, David sent this word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. and Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to the house. Notice David. And then chit-chat, small talk. Tell me, nothing's wrong. Tell me how everything's going. Now, very deceptive. He didn't call him in and say, "I'm sorry I slept with your wife." It was, "Tell me how the battle's going. Now, by the way, why don't you go home? Go see your wife. You've been away for a long time. Go see her." What's he thinking? He says, "I'm going to cover his son." But what does Uriah do?
That's the right thing.
Well, he slaps the king in the face, basically. He says, "Yeah, no, you're not fooling me." He probably heard about it anyway from people that were bringing food and supplies to the army. He was probably aware of it. And he said, "I'm not going to fool with it. I'm not going to play that game with you." So then, of course, he slept at the gate, and David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military camp home? Why didn't you go home?" Now, if he had gone home, David's honor would have been restored. Bathsheba would still be the unhappy victim of all this. She was probably assaulted in addition to being sent away. David's concern wasn't right or wrong, was it? Do you see any instance in here where he gives it a second thought about what he's doing? The story's not even told. It's not even in his radar that he might have been doing something wrong. Now, Uriah probably heard all the things. And why did he sleep at the gate?
To honor his fighting men. They slept in tents, so he wasn't going to go home and be comfortable while they're out there fighting.
That's what he told David.
That's what he told David.
That's what he tells David. But why do you think he really did it? That's a slap in the king's face. The king says, "Why don't you go home with your wife?" And he says, "Nope, I'm not falling for it." And so it's a way for him to send a message to the king. It was also a way for him to make a public statement. He wasn't just going to go home and follow the orders. He's making a public statement about the king and their relationship. In verse 11, David ups the ante and calls him back for a second conference. I don't know if you've ever been called to the principal's office or a boss or anybody. It's one thing for them to call you in and everything's polite, but then they call you back in a second time. And this isn't another pleasant visit. I don't get called into the office every day. There's something happening. And so this is kind of a veiled threat when he calls him in a second time. And David says, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." He's angry. But again, if you look at who's there, we talked about the army. There's an additional reference to something here that's there, and that's God, the ark, symbolizing God, and we kind of gloss over that kind of thing. And so David should have been where that ark is.
It's kind of a reference to that everybody is where they're supposed to be, but you're not.
Right. Exactly. Let's go on. Verse 12. Then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. Now, why would he make him drunk?
So they come home.
They didn't say, oh, and by the way, in the process, they both got drunk. It was David made him drunk, made him drink enough that he was drunk. But despite that, Uriah still did not go home. So at this point, all the servants, everybody who's seen this, everybody who knows he's sleeping, everybody that's involved in this thing knows that David's not going to get out of this in an honorable way. There's no honor in what's happening right here. Uriah is going to force his hand and embarrass him, shame him. So he's going to have that loss of honor. 14 through 16 or through 17, we see that David wrote a letter to Joab, and he said, put Uriah out in the front, make sure he gets killed. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite fell. Now, I told you before, kings can do anything they want. Do you remember Ahab wanting Naboth's vineyard? Did he get it? He did. He just took it. Can you think of another? Turn to 2 Samuel 24, verse 24. Now, this is going to be after David's debacle with Bathsheba. What does it say?
But the king replied to Araunah, no, I insist on paying for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing.
Okay. Before, he was willing to take anything because it didn't cost him anything. But later in the book, we see that he apparently learned a lesson. He's not going to worship the God with anything that doesn't cost him something. Now, I was jumping ahead there a little bit for you. So in the rest of the story, Joab sent a full account of the battle. The king got an account of the battle, and look at what he says. When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubesheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebes? Why did you get so close to the wall? If he asks you this, then say to him, moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. Now, again, David didn't want those other people to die. But that's one of the dishonorable things that he did. In his effort to get Hittite Uriah dead, he had to sacrifice other men. And that is not moral. The messenger sent out, told the story, and David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. Now, look what he's doing. He's making an excuse. He's saying, oh, it doesn't matter. He didn't flare up. He wasn't angry. He just said, well, that's part of the deal. Some people got to die. But Uriah's dead. he sacrificed other people for that. Do we see anywhere yet any sense of remorse, sorrow, pricked conscience? Nothing. These people you love got killed in the process of killing the Hittites. It's all right. There's more where they came from. You know, it's very flippant. His honor is restored. Bathsheba moves in, so the baby is David's. So she probably got what she wanted. Only Uriah and David were involved in the suffering. And David probably thought it was all Uriah's fault. Why? Why would he think it's all Uriah's fault?
He didn't go home and sleep with his wife.
Yeah. I gave you an opportunity to go home and sleep with your wife, and you decided to be a recalcitrant soldier. I mean, why would you do that? I sent you a gift even. Uriah didn't take the gift. Why? Because it was too cheap. The gift was refused for another reason, because what he valued was more important than that gift that David sent. So we see here that David, according to his culture, did nothing wrong. He was able to do everything that he did, and people listened to him and they did it. Now turn to the next chapter.
The baby died.
Well, yeah.
In chapter 12.
In chapter 12, Nathan comes to David and he tells him a story. And I'm not going to go through the whole chapter 12, but he tells him a story. He says, a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. And look what Nathan says in verse 7. You are the man. It took a prophet to come to David and God tells him, he says, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you. I gave you wives. I gave you all of Israel and Judah, et cetera, et cetera. He said in verse 11, this is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Why? What's the significance of doing it in broad daylight? When do people do their bad things? And for humiliation. Most people do their bad things that they're going to get in trouble for. That's why Nora's mother had her come home at midnight, because she said nothing good ever happens after midnight.
That's right.
She didn't know how hard we tried. No. Just kidding. So it's in broad daylight. It's dishonoring him. That honor that he sought, that idea of shaming. David was shamed. Shame is not a bad thing. How many of you have ever heard your parents say, or say about someone? I think about the guys that wear their jeans way down here and walk around. What do you want to say? Have you no shame? Right? We say that. Or people, their daughters want to go out dressed like they think they shouldn't. You say, have you no shame? And not only are you worried about shame on them, but it's like, I don't want people in the community thinking that's how I raised you. I would be embarrassed. I would be shamed to have you out there like that. And so here's a case where he is caught up and ultimately punished. And like you said, the baby did die. Now, in our culture, we tend to be introspective. We do something and we stop and think about it. I know you do. You sit and say, should I have said that? Should I have done that? Should I have handled my kids that way? We're introspective. We analyze because it's us. How often do you say, boy, I yelled at my kids. That must have really hurt the community. What do we say about things if somebody does something wrong here at the church? Let's say I'm an elder. Oh, yeah. Let's say I'm doing something wrong. How would you all handle me? What's your first thought?
You brought reproach on the church.
But you would say that to me face to face. What are we taught to do? If you see somebody doing something wrong, you go to them and talk to them
In love.
and in private. Our culture is let's talk to them privately. Sometimes that private conversation doesn't accomplish. If you stood up in front of the auditorium and said, that guy Bill Kopf, he's been cheating on his wife, he shouldn't be an elder. Would I come back in the church the next time? Probably not. I'd be shamed. And we don't do that. The church used to do those kind of things. They used to call people out from the audience and say, and you've seen them or heard them probably, point at somebody and say, you're doing. Fortunately, I never got called out. So, okay. I just want to touch on this. How many of you watched The Chosen?
Watch what?
The Chosen. Do you remember the priest that had questions about Jesus? When did he ask the questions? At night. He went to see him alone. And that's probably why we do what we do. But in that culture, do you remember in the story before that, the conversations were always in the temple, and it was always one priest confronting another priest. They weren't asking questions for information. They were asking questions in order to embarrass or dishonor that other person. Go back and watch the movie. Read the stories in the Bible. In that culture, it was not uncommon in public for me to ask you a question, and when you couldn't answer it right, or if I replied to you and I stymied you, then you would be without honor and I would have honor. And so it was almost like a game. But think about this for a minute. When did they stop questioning Jesus?
When he asked them a question, they could.
Right. He embarrassed them, and what did they decide to do?
Never again.
Right. They said, we can't talk to him. And what do they decide to do? They have to get him executed as a criminal. Why? To dishonor him and to save face. And this honor, shame culture that they went through. I have all kinds of scriptures up here about where God wants honor. He honors people who obey him. All that honor, shame culture, we ignore. I bet you none of you actually looked at that story about David and Bathsheba and ever analyzed it from an honor thing. Did the Spirit convict him? Yes, but it wasn't internal. It wasn't a Western way of handling things. It wasn't internal where he said, I've been thinking about this and man, I'm evil. He was not convicted. He thought everything he was doing, it was okay for him to do because the culture said it was okay for him to do. It was only when God sent a prophet that he was convicted. And it was convicted based on he lost that honor. And he did learn from it apparently, because later in Samuel we see that he picked up an honorable way to deal with situations. I did a lot of talking. I didn't get you to answer or ask questions. I know it says 8 o'clock there. I don't know if that's right. Any questions? Nora said, if you're wrong, I'm going to call you out and embarrass you. And you'll lose honor. I hope I give you something to think about. I mean, because I'm the same way. I read that story a lot of times, and I never thought of it coming at it from that angle. And think of it, if you're a Middle Eastern person, if you're Jewish and you're reading that story, you're going to read into it all the honor and shame. I mentioned this once before. When you look at the story about the prodigal son, everybody in America, if I were to ask you about that story, think about it now for a minute. How many of you would say the important point in that story is the famine? Almost all of you would say it's because he went off and he came back and his father ran to him. And you would tell me all that. But in Eastern cultures, because they've experienced famine, they know the famine, they understand that even through the famine, God was there for that boy. And they saw it from a different angle than we do. And so I hope maybe I get you to start thinking, when I read a story in the Bible, what's happening geographically, what's happening there? Think of the culture and how that may change the perception of how that story is told and read. Appreciate it. Thank you. No questions? No